And welcome back. My next guest is Helen Perkins, a Clarkstown Auxiliary Police Officer and the Director of Volunteer Services at Montefiore Nyack Hospital. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
So delighted to have you on. On the program, you've been a very active volunteer within our community through the Police Auxiliary Services through our police department, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But I'm also excited to talk a little bit about your career with Montefiore Nyack and with the volunteer services there, and some opportunities that people could be able to get involved in, both as a auxiliary police officer and also with the hospital. But before we get to that, why don't we talk a little bit just about your family background? How long have you lived here? A little bit about yourself.
Okay. So my father was a New York Police Department police officer, and when they decided that police officers can move out of the city, he decided to take the family up here to Rockland County, and we moved to New City, and that was in 1959 that we moved up here, and I was 3 years old.
Wow.
Moved up here. I was educated here, graduated Clarkstown North, have 6 siblings.
Mm-hmm.
That all graduated from North. We lived on Windmill Lane, and since we had so many children, we moved over to Lansdale Road, the other side of New City. And I always wanted to be a police officer like my dad was, mm-hmm. and he was a deputy inspector in NYPD. And I did take the Clarkstown police test back in the 70s, and I was called down to become a police officer. I had a 1-year-old son. I ended up turning it down. Dad was not happy, but I decided to go to school for healthcare. Always wanted to help people.
Right.
That was something I always wanted to do. So I went to school. Mm-hmm. I got my master's in healthcare administration, and I started at Nyack Hospital, Montefiore Nyack, in 1980.
Wow. And you've been there ever since?
I've been there ever since.
So since we're kind of talking about Montefiore Nyack, let's talk about that first.
Right.
You're the Director of Volunteer Services at Montefiore Nyack. What does that job entail, and let's talk about the numbers of volunteers at Nyack.
Correct. So we'll talk about the adult volunteers first. Mm-hmm. I have about 107 now adult volunteers. On campus, off campus, it's a great, volunteering is wonderful for the older adult. Some of them meet friends, they're retired now. Some of them lost their spouses, so it's great for their body, mind, meeting people, just having fun, mm-hmm. and being out there and socializing. All different departments I have volunteers in, thrift shop off-site, Blue Hill off-site, on-site. When people think of volunteering at Montefiore Nyack, people think about healthcare, of course. Mm-hmm. And people will say, well, what am I going to do there as a volunteer? But you have to remember that Montefiore Nyack has many different departments. Clerical work, you can work with the patients, you can work in the food service department. So there are many different areas that you can go to as a volunteer there. Also, we have our college students, so they get experience, so they'll be getting the experience that they need, and maybe they decided that maybe nursing wasn't for them and they wanted to be a physician assistant. Mm-hmm. So it's great for college students, and I would say throughout the year we have probably about 60 to 70 college students come through. Wow. The biggest group that come through, believe it or not, and I call them volunteens, mm-hmm. Are the high school students. Right now we have over 200 applications. Wow. For the summer, and the students are in many, many different areas, and they usually volunteer about 70 hours for the summer. Mm-hmm. So it's great for their career and deciding, what do I really want to do when I grow up?
Wow.
So we have a tremendous amount of students.
Right. Dr. Geller is a really dear friend of mine, the president of the hospital, and he's talked to me in the past about the volunteer services at the hospital, and it's very true, because if you have a skill set, a particular skill set, from my understanding, you can really fit somebody into their particular skill set and comfort zone to be able to volunteer.
Right.
And what are maybe some of the more unusual volunteer slots you've been able to fit people in during your career?
I would say that some of the, especially the college students, you know, not only helping in the ED, but also shadowing a physician to see if I really want to do this. And not that they can do hands-on, but they learn so much. The other areas that I fit in are students with disabilities, and try to help them to be able to go out into the workforce and to be able to do a job. So that's the most satisfying. The BOCES across the street, the Riverside High School students that are disabled, come and learn to be able to go into a store, to be able to work and get a paid job as they get older. And I think that's one of the things that I'm very proud of doing. And we have hired, like in our transport department or in our department where they bring stock to the floors, we have hired some of those people and those students. And it's just so great to see that they're out there and they want to work and they're so dedicated.
Yeah, years ago when I had been the executive director at Rockland Independent Living Center, we had worked with a number of individuals that had done some internship type work there that ultimately led them, I can think of at least one that actually wasn't hired by the hospital, but was able to use that experience with a person with a disability. The unemployment rate amongst people with disabilities is at least triple, you know, the average population in the best of places in the country. I think in Rockland County it runs about 30%. So if you have a profound disability, you know, you're 30% likely to be out of work.
Correct.
And so it's very, very difficult finding opportunities. So to kind of prove yourself through an internship, and then we had a couple of folks I know were hired, but one ended up being hired in a very busy doctor's office. And one of the deciding factors was that they had done volunteer work at the hospital through their internship, and it really helped. You know, it was a really great thing to see.
Right.
So that's just an incredibly full career, but you're a busy lady. You know, you recently started up a small business. Why don't we'll give a shout out to your small business. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So my small business is Jams and Delis, Perkins Preserves, and we're located in Valley Cottage. For years, growing up, spent many times out on the farm with my aunt and uncle upstate New York, and we used to go out and pick the berries, and she used to teach us how to make the jams, and I've been interested ever since. And since I had a big family, I started making jams for many friends at the hospital and family members. And then people were like, "Can I buy your jam?" And I was like, "I'm not really sure. I don't have a license." So I ended up going to get my license, get certified, and for years I made people jams, and then decided to open a jam store, which I do other cakes and things like that, but only to order. But preserves, jams, and jellies is my business, so stop in and visit me. I'm there mostly on weekends. Like 11 o'clock to 3, but during the week, 5:30, of course, after I work at the hospital.
Right, right. And despite that, despite a full-time job at the hospital and a big job at the hospital, and starting a small business where you're doing that, you also find time to be an auxiliary police officer. So let's talk about becoming an auxiliary police officer. How long have you been an auxiliary police officer?
This year will be 4 years.
Okay.
And I have over 1,000 hours of volunteer.
Right. So what's the type of training that you had to go through to become an auxiliary police officer?
Okay, so I decided to become a police officer because if I didn't do it now, and I always wanted to be a police officer, I always wanted to feel what it was like and to help people, be out there in my community helping. Actually, the interview, you go through an interview process, background check, and then for the training, you're actually with a seasoned auxiliary officer. We have baton training, we have handcuff training, pepper spray training, and learning all about the police car, and EVOC training, how to drive a police car. So yearly training, I have CPR training also, just in case anybody, needs it while we're out there on detail. And so they do yearly training, and it really prepares us to be out there in the community.
Right. And the Clarkstown Police Auxiliaries is the largest police auxiliary group by far of any of the police departments. One of the larger police auxiliary groups in the lower Hudson Valley out of any of the police departments in our area, in our region. And collectively last year did just about 9,000 hours of volunteer work. And those details, well, talk about some of the details just in general that you would be on.
Okay, so I do a lot of details.
Yeah.
Last year I was the second highest with 351 hours. I do the fireworks, which the biggest ones are Nanuet fireworks, getting people in safely, parking, handicap parking, getting people out quickly and safely, crossing people over the crosswalks. The other ones we do are school events, so we do a lot of elementary school events, high school basketball, football at the high schools. I do also patrolling during the holiday time in parking lots, make sure no one's parked in the fire lanes for everybody's safety. And I do volunteer also at the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which is one of my favorite with the little kids.
Right.
And so many details in the community, all community events.
Right.
Carry the Load, which is going to be coming up in Congers. So, and we sign up for the detail. And then there is an auxiliary officer in charge of the detail. And then there's a regular lieutenant or sergeant on the police force that oversees us on the detail.
Right. It's absolutely an incredible way to give back to the community. It saves taxpayers literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, because if we didn't have the police auxiliary handling these details, we'd have to have additional police out there and on overtime, and or we'd have to hire additional police officers that would have to handle these events. So 9,000 hours is just a huge number, and it's not that the Clarkstown police aren't part of it. They are. Whenever there's a detail, the auxiliaries are worked into the communication. You're dressed in a lighter blue uniform than our police officers wear, but you're in the same police car. You have the same police radio. You have the ability. You're on the radio as well. There's training for that. So it's a great way in which people can get experience. There's also a number of folks, younger people that have come on. It's a really wonderful mix. There's some younger people, people 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and you have even up into senior citizens. Just recently, I guess last year we had Tony Moreno retire from being an auxiliary, but I think Tony's probably early 80s. So we have a number of senior citizens that are volunteering as well, and it's just a great communal group. You can see a lot of friendship amongst the auxiliaries, and a great way to give back. And if you're a younger person, it's also an opportunity where some of those younger people get the experience. They're working and doing whatever and taking tests to get hired as a police officer, and it's just another opportunity to kind of build out their resume and get additional experience and training in a law enforcement setting that helps them to get hired. Just recently, I think we had 2 auxiliary officers that have been hired as correctional officers around the state. So just a great group. Helen, I think we're about out of time, but why don't you give your contact at Montefiore Nyack if somebody wants to contact you about volunteering, and we'll put up the information how people can get in touch with the police if they're interested in becoming a police auxiliary or learning more about that.
Okay, so you can go to online. We have applications on our website. You can go to montefiorenyack.org and fill out an application, and when you submit it, it will come right to my office. One of my volunteers, because I have 3 volunteers that work in the office, One of them will be in touch and call up to set up an interview. There's also, I wanted to mention, RSVP, Retired Senior Volunteer Program, which if you want to volunteer through them, you could set up through the RSVP. Also, they provide rides for my volunteers who cannot drive. So if you do have an adult at home who is sitting around doing nothing, wants to get out and volunteer, you can call RSVP, sign them up. They could drive them to the hospital, pick them up from the hospital, drive them home, and if you drive yourself, you can get reimbursement for your gas mileage.
Right.
So montefiore@nyack.org, please fill out an application. We're looking for adult volunteers, and we would love to have you on board.
Right. And is there a way in which folks can get in contact with you about cakes or jams as well, as long as we're doing that?
Yes, so I have a site that you can email me at perkinspreserves.org.
Great. We're going to cover it all. So listen, folks, after seeing this interview, you can volunteer at Nyack, you can become a police auxiliary officer, and on your way home from one of the details, you can stop by Helen's store in Valley Cottage and pick up some great preserves. I've had them, they're wonderful.
Thank you.
So Helen, thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for Richard Jarko, U.S. Army veteran, who will be coming up.